and welcome to our first Pensions and Protection podcast in association with Royal London. I'm Kimberley Dondo, Digital Content Manager for Money Marketing, and the first episode of our new Pensions and Protection series will discuss how the new Consumer Duty regulations are providing more support for consumers. We'll also think about the ongoing cost of living and interest rate crises and how both are affecting consumers. And we'll look at the ways in which providers and advisors can support each other to ensure customers maintain a good financial resilience. Today I'm joined by Sarah Pennells, Consumer Finance Specialist, and Clare Moffat, Head of Technical and Marketing Compliance from Royal London. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you. Hi, good to meet you.
So can we start with you, Sarah? Can you give us a bit of a background into yourself and your role?
Yes, so as you said, I'm the Consumer Finance Specialist at Royal London. So I've been with Royal London since the start of 2020. Before then, I was a personal finance journalist for most of my career. My job at Royal London, though, is to look at the kind of financial issues that people face every day and think about what we can do to help. So at the moment, I'm spending a lot of my time talking about the cost of living and rises in interest rates, inflation and so on. But I might also talk about things like the state pension and help people understand what standard of living that might provide them in retirement.
Right. Great. And Clare?
So as you mentioned, I'm the Head of Technical and Marketing Compliance. And what we would do is we would think about what advisors need help with. So sometimes we're writing articles, giving presentations, doing webinars, things like that. So looking at legislation, regulation, and really trying to kind of help with some of the complexities. And so we're very busy on the pension side in relation to that just now. And I would also help out with some of the consumer stuff. So Sarah and I work together sometimes on some of the consumer issues, thinking about what help we can give in that area too.
Okay, great. So since you know quite a bit about regulations, I'm going to stick with you here, Clare, for this question. So could you give us a reminder of the aims of the Consumer Duty in relation to ensuring clients have access to financial products that will meet their needs now and into the future?
I'm not going to talk about Consumer Duty in a huge amount of detail. I'm sure the listeners will be glad to hear that. But I do want to pick out some of the key points which I think deal with this question about needs now and in the future. And of course, we have to start with that principle, don't we? Of a firm must act to deliver good customer outcomes for retail customers.
Right.
Now, one of the key aspects of the Consumer Duty and something that sets it apart from previous regimes like treating customers fairly is the degree to which the FCA expects the duty to be embedded across all of our cultures and to be evident across whole firms. Now, again, I'm not going to go into detail into the cross-cutting rules and the outcomes, but I just want to mention when I think these are important in relation to this question. So foreseeable harm, well, that's one of these areas, and that can be through action and omission to act. And we need to act to avoid harm that can be reasonably predicted. Now, another one that I think is crucial is that firms must act to enable and support customers to pursue their financial objectives. And of course, that's throughout the customer journey and the life cycle of the product or service. Now, of course, when we think about this, it doesn't remove the responsibility that consumers have for their actions, but consumers can only take responsibility when they're enabled and supported to make these informed decisions in their interests. And advisor firms and providers, well, we need to proactively and reactively focus on putting customers into a better position to make these decisions in line with their needs and objectives. And that can mean taking account of consumers' behavioural biases and the impact that characteristics like vulnerability can have on their needs. And so now I just want to have a think about some of the outcomes that I think are relevant. And the first one I think is really key when we think about this question is products and services. And that's all about making sure that these are designed to meet the needs of consumers in the target market. So regularly reviewing recommended products in line with intended target markets, well, that's helping now and in the future. So it's not a one-off exercise. And if issues do emerge, it's preventing any further harm that's really important.
Right.
Price and value, well, that's key. That's not about a price cap or a requirement to be the cheapest in the market. Essentially, what the FCA are saying is that firms need to ensure that the price a customer pays for a product is reasonable compared to those overall benefits that they get. And we know that some products can take advantage of that natural inertia. So long-standing customers who, they've been in a product for a long time, they might receive low interest rates or high charges, and that could be poor value. Customer understanding, well, that is key. And of course, there's that high level requirement for the package of communications to support good outcomes. So using clear and plain language, making things simple. Does the client understand? And doing things like avoiding long sentences, using colour. And one area that was really highlighted by the FCA was that of layering. So where the most important information is at the beginning,
right,
or summarised, and then the least important at the back, because we know that's where it's likely to be least read. And we know that consumers are reluctant to admit to a lack of understanding. And so we can't just ask, are clients satisfied and, have they understood the process, because that could fall a bit short. So the regulator wants to see more probing analysis in these reviews that test and demonstrate understanding. Now, it's not a requirement to do this for every customer, but the regulator does, they expect firms to be able to demonstrate that they've got an approach that delivers these outcomes. And the last outcome I want to mention here, well, that's consumer support. So making sure there's no barriers in place for clients who want to contact them, switch funds, products. And again, there's an emphasis put on characteristics of vulnerability. And we're going to come back to that in a minute, I think. But there's also this, we need to think about this kind of onus on wealth advisors to think about protection needs of their clients. And, if they can't deal with it, referring them on. And the same with protection advisors considering pensions for their clients. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through, how the consumer duty supports consumers in relation to access of products now, but also in the future.
Yeah, it's quite comprehensive, and I think it was a helpful reminder for sure. So Sarah, with your background and your knowledge, how are the challenges we're currently seeing in the economy affecting consumers' lifestyles and their attitudes to building financial resilience?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question. And we have been tracking how people are responding to the cost of living crisis since February last year. And the way we've been doing that is we've been carrying out research every 6 months with a sample of 4,000 nationally representative UK adults. Now, at the moment, not surprisingly, many people are worried about rising housing costs, and that's true whether they've got a mortgage or whether they rent. When we started tracking this in February 2022, we were asking people about, cutbacks they were making. Were they making cutbacks to their day-to-day or longer-term spending to help them to pay for these rising, essential bills? And what they've told us consistently is they are making cutbacks on their day-to-day spending. So things like eating out less, buying cheaper food, buying less food, buying fewer clothes, those kind of things. I think encouragingly, what we've also found quite consistently is that most people aren't making cutbacks to their pension contributions or protection policies. So again, this is something that we've tracked. And one of the ways we've done this is we ask people about cutbacks they're planning to make. And then 6 months later, we say, okay, what cutbacks did you make? And now what cutbacks are you planning to make in the future? And when we've done this, approximately 1 in 10 people, give or take, have consistently said they are considering cutting back on their pension contributions. But when we go back 6 months later and say, okay, what have you actually done? Only about 1 in 20 have actually done it. So that's the positive news. I think where it is worrying and where I think it's probably getting a bit more worrying is that we are seeing for those people who have savings, they are being eroded. People are dipping into their savings to pay for those higher day-to-day living costs. And I say, where people have savings because not everybody does. And again, our research has shown that about 1 in 5 people have less than £100 in savings. So that's, a really low buffer for them. And I think one of the reasons that we found the level of savings so concerning is that it's actually the amount of savings someone has that is a bigger indicator of their likelihood of being in financial crisis than their income level. Now, in our research, we've defined financial crisis as being unable to pay major household bills. Now, we ask people about their savings, but we ask them a sort of similar and related question, which is, what size of unexpected expense could you cope with, either from your income or savings? And this fluctuates slightly, over the last sort of 18 months while we've been tracking people. But between a quarter and 3 in 10 people have said they can only cope with an unexpected expense of up to £500. And when you look at what's been happening to, ongoing rising costs, particularly recently around mortgages and rent, for this group of people, they've got very low financial resilience and so are very vulnerable to a relatively small change in their own circumstances.
Yeah. It feels quite difficult, doesn't it? Figuring out exactly how people will be able to balance that moving forward.
Yes, absolutely.
I think this question is for both of you. So I'll start with you, Claire. How can providers like Rural London identify vulnerable customers, like Sarah just mentioned, and support advisors to help those who are struggling?
Well, I think providers can help advisors better understand the challenges for consumers at different stages of life and help identify different types of customer vulnerability. Now, we've got a consumer duty hub, we've got resources there, and I think what advisors are telling us has been really useful as our guide to supporting vulnerable clients. We have a fair value assessment template and we have a cost of service template. So that's 3 areas where providers can help. And and I think Sarah is much better at talking about kind of vulnerability in general. But when we think about vulnerability, people can suddenly become vulnerable. And a good example of that is death. And advisors can help a lot at a time like that because they have good relationships with their clients. So that often means that, this has been talked about at length before death. Now, that might be in relation to talking about wills, nomination of beneficiaries for pensions, trust planning, for life policies, for example, to make sure that the right money goes to the right person at the right time. So when that death of a loved one happens, then having an advisor that the client trusts, well, it's crucial because decisions will need to be made. And a good example is, if a spouse inherits a large pension fund and they want to go into drawdown, then there has to be conversations about risk and planning. And that's happening at a difficult time. So if there's a great relationship there, that's crucial. But then it's about thinking about, how can providers and advisors work together to support these vulnerable customers? And from a provider point of view, then we've got a wealth of insight from customer behaviour into potential problems for customers. So we can look at trends in customer behaviour. So maybe monitoring requests for additional support, like payment holidays, increases in missed payments. We've got financial wellbeing content. We've got helping hand mental health support for protection customers. And we can recommend that customers seek further financial advice if maybe they've not had financial advice in the past. Now, of course, we won't always have that client-specific knowledge, but we can give an overview of how things are trending and look for patterns in consumer behaviour, and that will help advisors. And advisors can tell us about clients and vice versa, and that means that there's an opportunity for advisors, so if issues are identified, to reach out to their clients at this difficult time and review their needs. And that should give confidence to advisors and providers alike so that we can responsibly share information, which we feel is going to ensure better customer outcomes, especially when we're thinking about those vulnerable customer cases.
And Sarah, with your perspective, what can providers do to help vulnerable customers?
I think before we talk about that, it's maybe just worth taking a bit of a step back and looking at how the way many people view vulnerability has changed.
Right.
The COVID pandemic showed us in a very brutal form that someone's circumstances can change dramatically due to a situation that's absolutely outside their control and which could not have been predicted.
Yeah.
And we know that some people benefited financially from being able to work at home, without having to pay for commuter costs, meals out, those kind of things during COVID. Mm-hmm. But others became financially vulnerable very quickly for a range of reasons. And, it could have been that they lost their job as a result of the COVID lockdown, or their hours were reduced, or they were bereaved, or maybe their own health suffered. And I think what many consumers found difficult, apart from the obvious sort of horror of the pandemic itself, was just how vulnerable their own financial situation was. And in some cases, what little support was out there. Now, as we all know, we went straight from COVID to the cost of living crisis. And that has affected just about everyone to a greater or lesser degree. Although I think because of what's been happening with mortgage rates, we're now seeing a bit of a divide between those people who are paying housing costs and how they're affected, and those people who basically own their properties outright. But what I guess the last few years have shown us is that all customers are at risk of becoming vulnerable. But that risk is increased by 4 key drivers. So there's a health, life events, resilience, and capability. And one of the themes that's coming through from our research is that people don't know what help is available and are reluctant to ask for it. So when we published our first research into the cost of living in March last year, we launched a cost of living hub at the same time, which we regularly update. And that has information for consumers on how to cut their energy bills, what help is available from the government, and more recently, we added a guide on how to deal with rising mortgage rates. Now, I mentioned earlier on that financial capability was a key indicator of vulnerability, and we've done separate research this summer that showed us that people have quite a low understanding of the state pension. So again, we produced a guide that explains the basics of the state pension, and we also explain, I mentioned earlier that financial capability was a key indicator of vulnerability, and we did some separate research that showed us that people have quite a low understanding of the state pension. And so we produced this guide. It explains the basics of how it works, and we also explain in a step-by-step detail how to get a state pension forecast. And the reason we've done that is we found that fewer than half of people had actually got their own state pension forecast. That's what our research showed. So we created a state pension hub because we felt this was an area that we could really help our customers improve their financial resilience. And, the state pension is the foundation of most people's income in retirement. But again, our research shows that for 3 in 10 women and just over 1 in 8 men, it's their sole income. So as I said, we think it's a key part of improving people's financial resilience if they understand the state pension and what they might get, and also crucially, what that might translate to in terms of a standard of living in retirement. Now, these resources are designed with consumers in mind, but we do think that they are really useful resources for advisors, and they complement some of the resources that Claire was talking about earlier on, particularly around our Consumer Duty Hub.
And I'm sure, like you just mentioned, the state pension, and I know that there are potential changes that might be coming. So are these resources that are constantly updated with any changes that might come about?
Yeah, so we do update our guides on a regular basis. So I think there's quite a lot of confusion out there because some of the changes have been announced as a consultation, and then maybe there's been a change of plan. So the information we currently have talks about what we know is going to happen. And obviously, as and when further decisions are made, we'll incorporate that into the updated versions of our guides.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that very in-depth analysis and everything that we need to know about the Consumer Duty and what products are out there that can be helpful, especially with Royal London. So thank you, Claire and Sarah, for joining me today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the first episode in the new Pensions and Protection series in association with Royal London. In the next episode in the series, we'll be joined by 2 investment specialists to explore what to look out for when choosing your client's investment solutions and the value active management and expert governance can add. And if you'd like further resources or support to help grow your business and deliver value for your clients, visit advisor.royallondon.com/peoplepowered. See you next time.